Hello, my name is Ron. I have been tackling do-it-yourself projects for many years. Today I want to show you how I created a small table using EMT conduit pipe and plywood. Along the way, I'll show some tips, tools, tricks, and hacks for working with EMT conduit. Any mention of specific company names or vendors is for educational purposes, not intended as advertising. Let's get started. EMT conduit is usually sold in 10-foot lengths, sometimes 5-foot lengths. When I cut a 10-foot length of EMT, I like to use my small portable workbench because it clamps onto more area than my standard size vise does. It's important to secure the pipe firmly so it does not move when you cut it. I've marked where I want to cut and I line up the blade with my mark. Notice there are two small rollers on the cutter, and you want to make sure the pipe sits between those rollers. Turn the handle knob of the cutter to tighten the blade onto the pipe. Rotate the cutter slightly back and forth a little bit to see how much pressure is on the pipe. Start out with a light pressure, rotate it all the way around, and gradually increase the pressure by turning the knob on the pipe cutter. It may take several rotations, especially if your blade is a bit dull like mine is here, but it will eventually cut through. Here you see the result, a nice clean cut. I have everything laid out that I need to build the table. The cut pieces of EMT conduit, 90-degree connectors, bolts and nuts, and tools. Each 90-degree connector is made up of two parts held together by two bolts and nuts. I have assembled all but one of the connectors, but did not fully tighten the bolts and nuts yet. Here I demonstrate how you put together one of the connectors. I start the build by using my 50-year-old vise to hold one of the table legs while I put on the connector. I wrapped some cardboard around the EMT conduit so it would not get marked up while the vise is clamping it. After placing the connector over the one piece of EMT, I place each of the other EMT pieces into the connector, screwing the nuts and bolts into the nuts, but not completely tight yet. It definitely helps to have the one piece clamped into the vise for this procedure. Once you get the pieces adjusted like you need them, tighten down the bolts almost all the way. Then I rotated the connector so I can add another connector and two more pieces of EMT conduit. There is an indentation on the connector where the nut is, and it usually catches the edges of the nut to keep it from spinning while you tighten the bolt. But sometimes you need to hold it with a box end or a socket wrench until it catches. I removed the EMT from the vise and finished building the framework on the workbench top. I added some hose clamps to the upright conduit pieces so the connectors would stay in place where I wanted them. The best place to proceed here was to loosely connect one of the EMT pieces between two of the connectors and place that as a unit over the two upright conduit pieces. Then I could add one more piece of EMT to each of the connectors and tighten the bolts down. In place of an Allen or hex wrench, you can always use a socket adapter that has a hex wrench attached. Now I flip it over so I could add the remaining connectors and conduit. I had difficulty fitting the connectors on at this stage, so I used some painter's tape to tape the connectors onto the one piece of conduit. That kept the connectors open wide enough to fit over the other pieces of conduit. I used painter's tape because it comes off easily and does not leave a sticky residue. Once I positioned the connectors, I installed the bolts and nuts and loosely tightened them. Then I repeated for the other two connectors. So now I have the remaining connectors attached loosely, and I'm able to slide in the last two pieces of conduit and then tighten everything down like it needs to be. Here you see where the bolts and nuts have been tightened and the frame is standing in its upright position. The only thing left to do is to flip it over and put the rubber legs over the conduit. And here is the finished framework without the shelf. For this project, I cut and painted a 1/2-inch piece of plywood, and here is the finished table. I did not need to attach the plywood to the conduit for this particular project. So, that's how I made a small table using EMT conduit and plywood. Thanks for watching.